Personal Story segment tonight, honesty in journalism, especially when millions of dollars are at stake. I have been fortunate enough to have 20 books on the New York Times bestseller list. 11 of them hit #1. So an argument can be made that I should not even be mentioning this next story because I've had so much success in the publishing industry. But others have not been as fortunate as me. And the aforementioned New York Times bestseller list is now under suspicion. If a book makes that list that comes out Sundays, it generates more sales. Sometimes big money is involved. So this is no small thing. My latest project, Legends and Lies of Patriots, written by David Fisher, debuted last Saturday on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list at #1. It's also #1 on the Publishers Weekly bestseller list. That's the magazine that covers the book industry. But on the New York Times bestseller list, Legends and Lies of Patriots, #6. So how is that possible? According to the Nielsen organization, which tracks every book in America, Patriots sold 24,348 copies the week the Times put it at #6. The #1 book on the Times list, The Gene, sold just 9,781. A colossal difference. So we asked the editor of the New York Times, Dane Beckett, to appear this evening and explain his bestseller list, but he refused. That's too bad, because Mr. Beckett should know his list is not accurate. It's impossible for The Gene to have sold more copies than Legends and Lives of the Patriots. Impossible. Therefore, the New York Times bestseller list is not an honest barometer of book sales. We talked with Tim Graul, a literary marketing consultant, and Margie Ross, president of Regnery Publishing, yesterday. So, Ms. Ross, we'll begin with you. Regnery publishes a lot of conservative authors, and do you believe you're getting a fair shot from the New York Times?
No, in a simple word, no. We don't. They play games all the time with many of our books and most of our most high-profile authors who've experienced the same thing you've experienced.
Well, give me an example, though. Give me something solid.
Okay. Terrific. We published a book with David Limbaugh a couple of years ago called Jesus on Trial. It outsold the next highest book by 50%, and they didn't even put it on the list. Meanwhile, they had Henry Kissinger's book on the list at #4, which sold, as I say, 50% less.
Than David Limbaugh's book.
Than David Limbaugh's book.
That week. Because they go week by week, Mr. Graul. They go week by week. And the New York Times list means a lot to publishing houses and authors. If you can make the list, that leads to more sales and more publicity. In your experience and what you've researched, Mr. Graul, is the fix in over there, or what are they doing?
Well, what they're doing is they're just selecting the data that fulfills what they're looking for. So they're not just making up numbers, but what they're doing is they're sampling the right stores, sampling the right numbers to make sure that it kind of leans the way that they want it to lean.
But that's not a bestseller list, then.
Yeah, I think the bestseller list should have a big asterisk, and it should have some kind of
it should be called Books We Want to Be Bestsellers. This is why I'm doing a story. Right. I mean, I've had buku New York Times #1 bestsellers, but it's not about me. I'm just using my book as an example because it's so egregious. Right. So we know when we call the New York Times, they ask them to come on, it wouldn't come on. And they say they have a secret sauce, kind of like the Big Mac. And they go to secret bookstores, but they won't tell us which ones. Because then they say, if we tell you, then everybody will go in there and blah, blah, blah. Do you buy that at all, Ms. Ross?
Well, I buy that they have a secret sauce, and I buy that they don't want anyone to know because it will undermine their ability to control what's on the list. And I think the problem, of course, is transparency. That's not going to play well for the New York Times, but we've got a lot of data that we can access now, more and more, as you know, whether it's the Nielsen ratings or Amazon ratings or direct sales reports from the big chains.
Every
week,
we
actually know what's going on.
Every single book is accounted for. I get the numbers every single week, Mr. Graul.
As do I.
So if we all agree that the New York Times bestseller list really isn't a bestseller list, it's not. It has an agenda. It's the books they want to be bestsellers. Why don't they just change the name of it or do an honest count? Why don't they just do an honest count like the Wall Street Journal?
Well, there's lots of things that they play into it, because if they really just didn't want any conservative books, your book wouldn't even be on there at number 6.
But they couldn't do that. That would be fraud. Then they could be criminally charged if they did that.
But what they're doing is just sampling the right stores at the right times to lean it that way. Now, why don't they not call it a bestseller list? That's what I've been calling for a long time.
Have you?
Is it's not a bestseller list.
Right.
It is a list that have sold a certain amount that they think are good enough to be on that list.
Yeah, and I think that's the solution.
Right.
That it should be the New York Times, what books we want to be bestseller list. And then they can bring it down. And leave it to Publishers Weekly, the Wall Street Journal. USA Today is a fair list, I think. Ms. Ross, would you say USA Today is a fair list?
Much better than the New York Times, certainly. It corresponds much closer to
reality.
reality.
There's some shenanigans, but not too much. I mean,
much better.
Because as you said,
right.
the sales are exact now. Every week, everybody knows how many books are sold because the money's so big. So anyway, we appreciate you guys coming in, and maybe the New York Times will take my suggestion, but they never have in 20 years, so that would be a miracle.
We'll see.
Thanks, Bill.